Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Hayley Mitchell Haugen. I'm the editor of Sheila-Na-Gig Online and Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. Tonight, we're here to celebrate Bonnie Proudfoot and the publication of her chapbook, Household Gods, from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. And we have a great list of readers from our Sheila-Na-Gig Online Spring 2023 edition following Bonnie's reading as well. So welcome. Bonnie Proudfoot was born and raised in Queens, New York. She moved to the Appalachian region in 1979. Her short fiction and poetry have appeared widely in journals, and she received a fellowship for the arts from the West Virginia Department of Culture and History. Her first novel, Goshen Road by Swallow Press in 2020, was longlisted for the PEN Hemingway Award. It's amazing, you need to read it, and was recognized by the Women's National Book Association for its 2020 Great Group Reads. Household Gods is her first book of poetry, which I'm so honored to have had the privilege to publish. She lives in Athens, Ohio with her songwriter husband, where she writes and creates amazing artwork as in glass as well. So welcome to the ridiculously talented Bonnie Proudfoot. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, all. Thank you very much. Thanks, Hayley. It's just such an honor to be asked to read, and such an honor that you published this book of mine. That was a labor of love, really. And it's so wonderful to see the whole community of writers that come out all the time and support Sheila-Na-Gig. And every time a new edition comes out, of the quarterly, I just look up all the writers right away to see who's publishing what and what everybody's up to. And it just has turned into like a thing in my life that I really look forward to. So it's just a treat. I'm going to start with a poem. I guess this has to go out to George because his wonderful book that you published. And I thought, he writes so beautifully about places. So it's the opening poem of my book. It's called El Tiempo, and it takes place in Spain. It was set pre-COVID, and I went to Spain with my aunt and my cousin. My aunt is in her 80s and my cousin is in her 20s, and I was somewhere in the upper middle. El Tiempo, it's called. In Madrid, mini bikes weave up narrow blocks, grates over shop doorways unlock around 2-ish. We pace ourselves, my aunt, my cousin, me, reset our clock. We are 3 generations, a distance that disappears, viewing Goya, El Greco. Imagine an ocean passage, Ellis Island, Brooklyn, then Queens, everyone within inches. Grief and strife pierce apartment walls, thread into the bloodline. If anyone asks what you are, my mother instructs, tell them you are American. I try. Strangers see right through that gambit. My mother dies at 64, just before my cousin is born. This cousin whose fingers swell and throb as mine do, and my aunts do, as my mother's did. In El Parque Retiro, beside the Crystal Palace, a dark-haired woman sits at a folding table with a royal typewriter. Give me a theme, and I will give you a poem, a poster promises. El tiempo, I say, time. The matter of time, she types in Espanol, is immaterial, a bubble. 2 dogs face each other from either side of a spiral. She says the words come from the air. The letters push into soft vellum, ink already starting to fade. In a Barcelona cafe, a flamenco dancer spirals her veil, glances over her left shoulder. The past is gaining ground. It's snapping at her stamping heels. We clap faster and faster, hold tight to each other when she bows. So I wrote that poem to set the stage, really, and I thought, and my book is about the generations of my family. It's called Household Gods, really pays tribute to my grandmother and somewhat to my mom as well. And my mom's younger sister, who's my aunt, who was featured in the first poem. And we lived in an apartment building in Queens, New York on Metropolitan Avenue. And honestly, my grandmother lived across the street. My aunt lived in the same building. It was a very kind of close-knit family, Jewish family in Queens. And this was during the 1960s. So this poem is called Superpowers, and it sort of merges my consciousness of today with my consciousness when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. It has some cultural references. If you like Broadway shows like I did, you'll recognize Guys and Dolls. And if you never saw it on Broadway and you saw the movie, you'll know that Nathan Detroit was played by Frank Sinatra. It's kind of a cool thing. So, all right, superpowers. If all my thoughts have been thought before, who was the one who thought them? Probably it was some stranger, but maybe not. Maybe someone I knew, or maybe someone I loved so hard that she is actually a part of me, like my grandmother, who came by on poker nights. Maybe I inhaled her like the smoke from the tip of her parliament, or I ate her up like a slice of her pound cake with lemon drizzle icing. And superpowers? I used to think that they were accidents or destiny, like winning the lottery, or that someone could be switched at birth, or that there could be the slightest chance that a baby, say me, could have hurtled to Earth on a tiny cradle-shaped spaceship from a place sort of like Krypton. But maybe all my powers slipped in under my bedroom door, with the smoke, the smell of gin, the pink and green neon light sifting through those slats in the Venetian blinds, my brain soft and doughy like warm, silly putty, taking in the patterns on the wall. Sometimes everything is pink, and sometimes everything tastes like lemon. Sometimes the soundtrack in my head is the overture to Guys and Dolls. And what the men in the control booths who want to learn more about brainwashing don't know is that once you hear that overture, all you can think of is how you can't wait to see Frank Sinatra make his entrance as Nathan Detroit. And of course, one day I see myself in my 60s, for crying out loud, at my dining room table, facing my own grown children, using some of my superpowers to count the face cards and take tricks to know exactly where the line is between luck and skill. And these fingers of mine start to fuss for an invisible cigarette, though there is none in sight. And I know that the odds are good that life will betray them, that their bodies will betray them, that winning flashes off and on like a lotto sign, and that I, who at age 6 dressed up to trick or treat as a Parliament flip-top box, all white and blue and glowing, I will betray them too. I who cracked open the egg and hopped the train, and they who filled pickup trucks with sleeping bags and hit the road. But for now, I am here, the dealer, my elder son on my right, thinking things like, luck be a lady, and wash the cards, thinking, sign the bat signal, spin out that web, go ahead, cut them. So my grandmother said, wash the cards. Has anybody ever heard that expression? I don't know. And it meant deal, shuffle and deal. And it's a pretty old school expression, right? Wash the cards, kind of wonderful, but I've never heard anybody else say that. She said, it's your deal. I'm going to read a few more. This poem is for my brother. And my brother sort of is a record keeper of the family. He stayed in Queens and then, of course, moved to Manhattan and still lives in that area, Long Island. And he loved Winnie the Pooh, A.A. Milne. And I used to read it to him at night. And so I call this poem For Christopher Robin. He saved all the photographs of the family, of course. He's just that kind of guy. Thanks for sending me that photo of our trip out west. grandma's hair in curlers, peeking out the camper door, your forehead almost reaching my chin. Home, reading Winnie the Pooh by flashlight, our knees made a pup tent from the blanket. Through the walls, Mom did dishes. Dad's jaw did not unclench. We had pockets stuffed with secrets. How else could we get by? We always needed to ask permission. You loved Eeyore, mourned his missing tail. I loved the 100-acre wood, so huge, tiny sets of tracks heading somewhere like they knew which way to go. So I once read that A.A. Milne's son did not love being cast as Christopher Robin in the Pooh books. I found that kind of disappointing, really. But I get it. I get it. You know, he wanted to be in charge of his own destiny, and he was cast for life as Christopher Robin completely. I'll just read a couple more. This next poem that I like to read skips ahead in time, and when I was about 10 years old, there was a horrible event in my neighborhood. There was a murder. The person who was murdered was named Kitty Genovese. It's a pretty famous story. She was murdered and no one helped her. And it was 1964 in Queens. It happened in my neighborhood, and it came to be known as bystander syndrome, right? So as I was writing this book, it occurred to me that this was a very sort of pivotal moment in my life. And it really loomed large throughout my entire upbringing. So this is an elegy for Kitty Genovese. It has two parts. The first part is called Scar. If my old neighborhood is my body and PS 99 is my head and the big park is my right hand, then Kitty Genovese is my mouth. The train tracks zippering through. Under streetlights, apartment units rise behind storefronts. German deli, Turkish coffee, Hungarian pastries, Italian pizzeria, Polish, Chinese, Spanish spoken here. Orthodox Jews in long black coats gossip and scold in 200-year-old Yiddish. Parents hush children and herd them indoors, spikes driven deep from citizen spies and secret police. In a shop window, plucked ducks and geese dangle by their feet. I live on Don't Street, a street that has eyes. Don't let me catch you. Don't get your father. Stay out past. Break your grandmother's. Don't stare. Don't be there in the first place. Beside trash bins, pigeons cluster and coo. To have a scar, first there must be a wound, and in some cases, screams. Danger pulls his car over, finds a parking spot, and waits. To act means to summon authorities, to mind someone else's business. Kitty Genovese works in a bar, lives with a woman, walks home from work, calls out as he slams her into a doorway. She rings the buzzers to get in, but everyone covers their ears. The quiet deafening. If teeth are bricks, the tongue has to be a jackhammer. Blood on the sidewalk, photos at 11. What about the last couple, the ones who had the chance, the ones who could have? Are their children tucked in, drapes drawn, blinds closed behind them? It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? So that's part one of this poem. And then I began to think about it because I investigated it and I read more and more about it. And actually somebody did help Kitty Genovese in an interesting way. So I had to write part two then, because I didn't want this original way we thought about it to hold sway, I guess. So this one's called What If, part 2. What if you spend your whole life thinking that something really happened because everyone told you that it happened, but then you find out it didn't exactly happen like that? Take my neighborhood, Kew Gardens, 1964. Take the murder of Kitty Genovese. So many years ago, generations passed. Most of the witnesses are gone, and maybe even their grandchildren do not know what to think. At the big park, there is no such thing as time. The ball still smacks the wall, comes back, smacks the wall again. They called it bystander syndrome, when someone thinks that others will help, so they don't do anything, even when someone shouts out in pain with her final breath. Someone will report it, they think, as the theory goes, and someone did, actually. Someone yelled, "Stop," Robert Moser, and temporarily the killer ran away, but when the coast was clear, he came back. Someone sat with Kitty waiting for the police, Sophie Farrar. Names not mentioned by the newspapers, though 38 other people did witness Kitty Genovese being attacked. To have a syndrome, we must have enough people who do something or do not do something, and then a team of public policy experts who name what they did or didn't do. And then it is a syndrome. What if we fail each other more times than we know, and in more ways than we know? What if to speak means to open a wound, a knot of rage and grief? When a wound heals on a body, it stitches tight. But what if the scar is over your lips? What if every time you want to speak, you open it again? Would you heal, get quiet, slowly scar over? What if the ones you love say, "Hush, not now, just hush"? What I mean is that many did not help, and 2 people did help. No one recalls the names of those who did. So they made a documentary about it. It's an interesting story. You might want to find out a little bit more about Kitty Genovese. I mentioned that I lived in an apartment house in Queens, as you know. I'm going to read one more poem, and then we can turn over the open mic. And this is a little poem about, it's kind of a medium-sized poem about being a teenager in New York in right around 1970-ish. And, you can all remember if you flash back that far or if you were told about it. It was during the Vietnam War, right? It was right after Kent State and the protests. And I was only 16, but we were aware of the news, of course. And so this makes reference to Diem and Ho Chi Minh. One was the president of North Vietnam, and the other was the president of South Vietnam, and Buddhists setting themselves on fire as well. What we did: we stayed up all night on the rooftop, where empty bottles of MD 2020 and tubes of airplane model glue spent lined up in piles next to the pigeon coop. With the small arch-shaped windows, the thick spattered drips of shit running down the bricks, the soft, sleepy coos and clucks of doves, the breeze that carried clouds of soot, exhaust of diesel buses, and smoking brakes of delivery trucks from the street below. All that rancid waste, somehow sweetened by the must of feathers and warm tar. The only reason was because we could, because our parents were out doing what parents do, because our learning required that we see the world from a different perspective, because the neon sign of the bowling alley down the block and across the street shone alternately pink and green, and because the pre-dawn sky was a dingy brown with the glaze and the grit of streetlights and the eastern star and a sliver of a moon hanging. And on the radio were Diem and Ho, and on the TV, Buddhists set themselves ablaze for peace. But for us, it was nothing but spray paint, red brick, and plywood, and how good and bad became confused with each other in ways we just couldn't reach or wouldn't have known how to talk about. And we were sunburned, and we were moving through tunnels beneath buildings, up stairwells, through the banging steel-hinged door where warm ooze stuck to our naked feet, tips of glass and brick mixed with feathers. And when we looked toward the east, we could almost see the elevated train, the Jamaica Avenue line, and beyond that, Rockaway, the ocean, and forever. And we could turn the radio up as loud as we wanted. This house of the rising sun, the sun that burned through the distant haze. And we spread dirty sheets on that sullied ground. And after making art, we looked at the sky. So thank you very much, folks, for listening. And I look forward to the open mic. And I'm grateful to Haylee for sponsoring this reading and being my wonderful publisher who goes everywhere, Seattle, West Virginia, you name it.
Thank you, Bonnie. That was Bonnie Proudfoot reading from her chapbook, Household Gods, from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. Always wonderful to hear you, Bonnie. I could listen and read just over and over again. So thank you so much for being here. Going to hand the open mic over now to some selected readers from Sheila-Na-Gig Online Spring 2023 edition. So Juan Pablo, why don't you open us up?
Thank you. And thank you, Bonnie. I am honored and somewhat intimidated to follow you. My name is Juan Pablo Mobil. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I was adopted by New York about 40-something years ago. I'll read you two poems. One, the first published graciously by Haylee and Barbara. Thank you again for finding a home for my little orphans. And the second one is actually something very recent that I haven't even put out yet. Okay, what they both have in common is, I would say in the last few years, the invitation we received to navigate distances, not being with other people. All right, okay. This is called Scarly, and is what we call my youngest granddaughter. She was probably 2 when I wrote it. Scarlet Rose is her name. Scarly. Not touching you is a penance, a forced abstinence. I know it will be years before we have the chance to talk about what it's like to witness loss firsthand. But I tell you, it took pretty much my whole life to hold you without a hint of bitterness. I was born light years before you, even before your daddy and your mommy. You are a descendant of a tribe that struggled with their nature. You are a granddaughter of storms. Thank you, thank you. And this is a different kind of distance. It's called Zooming with my doctor. I tell my doctor I am certain I've come down with a bad case of nostalgia. But he believes that tests will show I suffer from acute melancholia. That's why you gained some weight, he says. He's convinced my body lacks the enzymes to dissolve the regrets I write about. And he urges me to consider cutting down on the number of poems I scribble. I am aghast that my physician thinks the most human of my ways may be a compulsion, subject to treatment by word fasting or the renunciation of my craft. But I'm polite, like my mother instructed. I nod, pretending to appreciate. What my soul warns me will be my death, the end of my hard keeping my indifference at bay. And I smiled the way my mother did when they told her not to feel so much. As if a rose would voluntarily surrender all its petals, convince herself she would still be a rose. Thank you.
I just had to turn on my mic. I'm Barb Jenis. I publish under the name B. Fulton Jenis. I have a chapbook called Blinded Birds. I put a thing in the chat. It's the story of 3 generations of women in my family who have dealt with addiction and depression. I'm not reading from that collection tonight. I'm reading some cheerier ones. I want to say thank you to Haylee and to Barbara, and also congratulations, Bonnie, on your chapbook. The 2 poems I'm going to read are from the current issue of Sheila-Na-Gig, and they are from a developing collection that I'm doing about pretty much my childhood. It's somewhat autobiographical, although not entirely. The first one is called Helen Sager's Eggs. Her nickels cost a nickel more than store-bought. Still, our parents remained loyal customers after an embolism filled Charlie's brain with a hot cloud as he plowed. 60 cents, Mert, just laid this morning, Helen always vowed, thrusting a ratty egg carton into our mother's hands. Helen counted the coins in her palm as she shuffled back to the farm in her 2 large boots. More than once, a sulfury miasma fouled the kitchen air after one of Helen's eggs was cracked on the skillet edge. Crash my ass, our mother cursed, or damn her old hens for these bloody yolks. At the first dance of freshman year, I was caught smoking cigarettes with an older boy, sent home, suspended for 3 days. My mother didn't speak, except to bark terse orders, wax the kitchen floor, hang up those damned clothes, get your crap off my table. But on Sunday, Helen leaned over the back of our pew, whispered, word gets around, chuckled, flashed me a shame on you look, then wriggled back into her pew. Through hymns, prayers, a sermon, my mother's face didn't change. Back at home, she rifled the pantry shelves, stuffed egg cartons into a paper bag, huffed off to the burn bin, lit greedy red flames to devour them. I shuffled out, stood beside her. Sorry, I managed at last. She turned to study this thing that had sprung from her, this egg turned flesh and fault. Helen wanted those cartons back, she said. We watched the smoke drift to places we'd never seen. So that's Helen Sager's Eggs. The next one is called, again, somewhat autobiographical, was called What Doc Wilkie Wanted. 3rd generation country physician, office downstairs in a dilapidated Rensselaer triple-decker. He left cigarettes burning on the back of toilets next to paper cups meant for urine samples. Doc took to riding a Harley on back roads after work, helmetless, lit cigarette dangling from his lips, tie blown back over his shoulder, never waved. What a clown, our father muttered. But when the big horse barn appeared in Doc's west field, we knew he'd had his fill of chicken pox and chest colds. Next, hay mowing equipment, an oversized corral, green John Deere tractor. Then a hand-painted sign, rodeo here Saturdays, call Doc, HO 4545. We were 2,000 miles from a stockyard, but by God, a horde of horse-hauling trailers appeared that weekend. We watched big-ass men in jeans and pointy-toed boots race reluctant horses around barrels, toss ropes at anemic calves. We never saw Doc Wilkie ride one of his palominos, much less appear on horseback for the Saturday crowd. But He stood on the lowest rung of his split rail fence, tipped his high-crowned felt hat at each competitor, waved hands clad in fringed white leather gloves at the crowd. The rodeos petered out and died forever by fall. The next time strep throat sent me to his office, Doc Wilkie was just a doctor again. White coat, clean fingernails, stethoscope. The smell of disinfectant skulked in the air. A cigarette slowly died on the toilet tank. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Sarah Carleton, and I'm going to start with the one that's in Sheila-Na-Gig. So I live in Florida now, but I lived in the Finger Lakes a long time ago, and I still think of that as the place I'm from, even though it's been a bajillion years. Right. The Bee Loud Glade. Before leaving the Finger Lakes for the long trip south, we stopped by a house where I once lived with a friend and find the porch rotted and the windows heaped with branches. No laundry hanging, no broccoli in rows. I've daydreamed about walnuts hammering that roof in autumn and the hills unfolding below, and how 40 years ago, the place was already decrepit. Rats scrabbling in the walls, cold blowing through the cracks, and us dancing in the living room, not like young Americans, but like pagans at a ruin, honoring the ancients. Now the inside looks dark as mud, not a space for humans anymore. I hear the breaker box buzzing behind the brambles and say, the power is on. Then realize the rusted metal hums, not with electricity, but from a gathering of bees singing the house to the other side. Okay, and for my second poem, I'm going to read one from my book, shameless promotion, Notes from the Girl Cave. And I'll put the link in the chat afterwards. Oh, where'd it go? There it is. Lost. In the night, in the wind, I search the roadside for white feathers glued to a leather mask, but the weeds and burrs won't give up their secrets, and my neck hurts from looking down. Traffic shoves a gust. A plastic bag fills with air and floats away, and for a minute, I think it's my chiffon scarf that disappeared in 1982. I have reached the highway of lost things. I'm keeping a lookout for odd screws, rosin, milkweed fluff, embroidery needles, senile cats, shark's teeth, and a straw hat that blew off at the beach 20 years ago and could have washed up waterlogged to lie in limbo among iPods, sock mates, habits, infatuations, flight phobia, and muscle tone. When my eyes adjust to the dark, I expect to find it all here on the berm, stuck in the prickles. Thank you.
Hi, I'll read two of my poems. The first one was published by you, Sheila-Na-Gig. It's called After the Storm. The water is always turbid after a storm, I tell him, and he is ironing a blue tie with yellow butterflies. Outside, the sun slants and cuts across the river's surface. 3 daughters are setting 3 birds on the globe. We will go where they land, the youngest says. Somewhere are insurrections, the Midwest cornfields flattened by tornadoes. Somewhere is a bitter taste like coffee grounds and ash on our tongues. And I think of the day the river was transparent. He and I caught trout with a fly and fried them with rosemary and lemon. We always fed the children first because the future left our bodies long ago when the butterflies found milkweed faster than we could run, when the daughters learned to feed the birds, to not give them too much millet, to mix their water with apple cider vinegar. They learn to take care. And now the storm is rolling by another home. A roof shivers, a barn pushes back. The horses stand with their rumps to the wind. Some Pavlovian moment makes me want to go into the basement and wait out the storm, but I stay above ground, and what we unbury can fly, what topples can burst into color, and the birds are perched on the jigsaw countries I've never seen. I look out the window at the murky river. A shaft of sun slices like a wing across its current. The water snags against stone and sings its plaintive song. And I think of my love, how like this it is, slicing, snagging, singing. And then the next one I'm going to read is from my book, Occupied, which won the Colorado Authors League Award in 2020. And this is a love poem because it's not February, but you know, it's the fruition of spring. And this one's called Between You and Me. Between you and me lie snow-covered alleys with footprints of cats and frozen dust. I walked those alleys as a child, peeked into backyards and a house where an old woman cooked on her stove. Between you and me is always a child, and you comb her hair, and she wears a yellow dress and hangs a blue bulb on her Christmas tree. I have traversed the alley between you and me, stomped my feet in the snow, wondering where the old woman's children went, wondering how I can find you to tell you about the child, how you can't let her go. Between you and me lie ice and the ache of labor. After our daughter was born, you caught my blood and threw it across the plains, and from it rose yucca, its flowers as white as the hospital walls that lay between you and me until I stopped bleeding, and I did. Now the cats are always hunting and the snow is too frozen for you to build the dragon you always sculpted for us. Branches lie etched in the white sky, and we sit in the hot tub, daughter dunking head in warm water, and you say, look how they're always reaching. And I look up at the web of branches and how they finger the clouds. And I wonder what the old woman was cooking, and I wonder if she's still alive. And I see that what lies between you and me has frozen roots, and its branches are the children that rise over snow-covered alleys that lie between you and me. Thank you.
I'm Joe Cottonwood from La Honda, California. Bonnie, everybody, I'm just amazed to be among this group of this array of talent. I'm just in awe of you all. So I've got 2 poems in the current issue, so I'll just go with those. The first one, maybe some of you know, I have a lifetime work as a contractor, so a lot of my poems are about adventures in the contracting trade. This one's called Marcy Calls to the Attic Hole. Marcy calls to the attic hole where I'm banging around, rewiring. Come down right now. On a day the office is supposed to be closed. Marcy needs to move a patient, so I walk into a room where a naked woman lies on the heavy chiropractic table with chunks of ceiling plaster, a towel over her bum. Marcy lifts the table, foot end. I lift the table, head end. The table woman stares at my tool belt buckle and smiles at the absurdity. We are all human. We all maintain dignity. In the hallway, Marcy explains, it's her attendant's day off, but her spine went berserk, so here we are. Later, Marcy asks me to help lift table woman, who is now in flowered dress and hat, lift from wheelchair into a Rolls Royce. So Marcy grabs beneath the arms, while I, dusty with attic dirt, grab table woman's bottom. And together we hoist, my hand of necessity, on a soft spot. Which is briefly weird, I tell you. Marcy notices, cocks an eyebrow. Table woman thanks Marcy, then smiles at me, above me, sweetly, but with condescension, as if I never. Squeezes the hand controls and drives stately away. My hand remembers. Marcy, whose job is bodies, says, you touch a person, something changes, right? A lot of my family is from Missouri. So this other one comes from that. This is called Steak, Well Done. Selected on the hoof after peering in the eye, how Uncle Merle judges beef. Walked by rope to an Amish man who butchers, loads 500 pounds of meat to Merle's two-wheel tractor, pulled by smoke-popping bare bones tractor to a freezer in town. A few cuts Merle brings home and cooks special for us, his West Coast nephew and family, who followed the Oregon Trail backwards for dinner, which is mid-afternoon in farm country time in Missouri. Back home, we don't eat meat, but we don't mention. Uncle Merle is a patched old machine, pushed too hard for too long. Threads of flesh bound in scraps of denim. He sweats red oil, shakes when idle. Then at top speed, he groans and grunts. Steak, says Merle, oughtn't be bloody inside. You want it cooked, but if you order well done in a restaurant, they get mad at you and flame it too fast, so it's burned outside, but still bloody in the middle. We appreciate we didn't have to evaluate this steak in the eye. Uncle Merle cooks with time, with sizzling fat. Well done, still juicy, but not bloody. The farm way. And golly, it's good. That's it.
My name is Rebecca Reynolds, and I published 2 books earlier in my life/career, and then worked as an administrator, a dean at Rutgers, and put publishing away for a while, but not writing. So now I'm putting together a manuscript that covers a long period of time. I want to read 2 poems. The second one will be the poem that is in Sheila-Na-Gig, and the first one is a little bit of a companion poem, but I wanted to write about relationships. I ended up writing a lot about my wife, who gave me permission to use the poems. The first poem is called Field Notes. 1, I have written about my butch lover wife, but not cluttering the house with notes and nickel change. 2, we are something entirely, but what we are is skin to leather cuffs, to coffee grounds, to breasts, stomachs, breath, and pulse, the cat fur dust, water chestnuts in her pockets, palms offering stars and cut points, red stain from wine berries, line our interior, half-love punishments. Then 3, drunk and far off dads. I'm sorry. Let me go back a line. Palms offering stars and cut points, red stain from wine berries. 3, drunk and far off dads, line our interior, half-love punishments. Then sometime 4, of dying. The ICU, flaps of green and vintage diamonds on threadbare wind-gap gowns. My stepmother can't think of a dead brain. We do, and shut our eyes on redbud blooms that stutter on the lot outside the safety glass. 1 father less. 5. We find this old, fathering ourselves, less hungry than the weight of bewilderment, being wildered or bewilder meant sleep with bearskin flesh, 2 drums of flesh and weathering. And this poem is called Suicide Prevention Workshop, many of which I had to attend throughout my years at Rutgers. Which of the following colors is used to symbolize oxygen? Maybe the color of your hair once you lose your black and the gray turns milky as a cloud, cirrocumulus again. The online dictionary quiz says white, but if I open my mouth to a stranger, I don't know if oxygen builds from my night throat. I learned commit suicide sounds like a crime. Instead, we say died by suicide or attempted suicide. In my numb response, I live my half-life without speaking truth for months, thinking everything turns to shit is the wrong thing to say before you find work again and the cats adore your strong hands, slink beneath the palms where you touch fur, the delicate bones and mandible yawns that ship their fish-like breath inside the rooms with the same hands stroking my hair. What stereotypes we halfway live, lesbians with cats. What harm does it do to ransom us from a language we so badly memorize? Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for these wonderful poems that you've given us. I live in Athens, Georgia. I was born in upstate New York, then moved to California, and but have lived in Athens for 41 years, where until just recently, I was a professor of aquatic ecology. I'm not going to read my poem that's in Sheila-Na-Gig because it has a graphical component, and that just wouldn't come off in reading. And if somebody has advice on how to read graphical poems, please let me know. This first poem is called Pentimento. Like oxygen bound by heme running underneath our dermis, like the maple syrup flowing under bark, or the iris petals curled within the bud, the important is both seen and unseen. Dissatisfied, the artist paints over an image. Years later, this pre-thought rises through the upper layers, visible first as a shadow or tracing, becoming a leafy tree or a smiling child. It is a pentimento, the unseen rising to be seen. 50 years ago today, we dug a hole through the pine-scented turf of the Angeles National Forest, burying Mom's ashes, consummating her wish for an unmarked grave. I hated her at the time, but I gave my word. Grandma said, "This will kill me." She lived another decade. Gazing at my grown daughters, I see thick chestnut hair, eyes brighter than blue topaz, earlobes unattached, pentamentos all, and I pray my quick anger or my parents' discontent hide not under the girls' layers of healthy and brilliant paint. Thank you. And so that's a poem I'm happy with. It's unpublished. This next poem, as I was thinking about this, I thought, and maybe somebody's done this, that we poets ought to have, how Kubler-Ross has the 5 stages of death or illness or whatever, that, we need the 5 stages of writing a poem, and the last is acceptance. And I haven't quite gotten to acceptance, but I hope you'll enjoy it anyway. So this is called The Day I Almost Dropped the Torah, and it has cultural references that I hope people get. Perhaps it was the altitude. Salt Lake City in unrolled omelet, 3,200 feet higher than my backyard, with a March wind that cut like a just honed fillet knife trimming up locks. Looking east, the Wasatch Mountains were a string of upside-down sugar cones with vanilla ice cream dribbling from the peaks. Or maybe it was jet lag, my unadapted cells unhappy with a 2-hour time differential from Georgia. But yesterday, I came close to dropping a Torah. This trip is for cousin Jessica's bat mitzvah, a rarity in my 21st century a-religious family, a right of choice now, not obligation. I remain one who practices our faith and have the honor of Hagbah, the lifting of the Torah scroll for view by the congregation, a signature of love and respect. Hagbah reenacts the prophet Ezra's unrolling holy scrolls and displaying their text for the Judeans. Sounds simple, but physically taxing. Excuse me. Each Torah, the handwritten 5 books of Moses, is wound onto long and top-heavy wooden spindles, weighing nearly 30 pounds. A modern Ezra, I unfurl the scroll until 3 columns of text may be seen, then lever it up off the bema, turn towards the tabernacle, lifting the open scroll, 1 spindle in each hand, high over my head, for the congregation to see. Suddenly, the right spindle decides that it's Joseph in his multicolored coat, while the left becomes his brother's, acting out the original jealous sin of casting Joseph down into the cistern. And as control struggles to fly away, like the stained glass doves in the sanctuary windows, I grasp that I'm now a true Israelite, metaphorically speaking, wrestling not with God, but with his words. I quickly clench my fingers around the maple handles and lower the scroll with the help of my spotter, the rabbinical intern. Seated, clasping the scroll to my chest, breath returning to normal, my wife begins to dress the Torah and says, "Don't worry, nobody noticed." So thank you very much. And I too have a new book. A new and only book. I'll drop. It's just published by Kelsey Press. I'll drop something in the chat. And thank you for your patience and attention.
Donna Hilbert from Long Beach, California, which should be sunny and absolutely beautiful right now, and it's not. Whatever. And what wonderful, wonderful poems we've had the pleasure of hearing so far. And I have to say, that must have a lot to do with our brilliant editor, Hayley Mitchell Haugen. So I'm going to read 2 poems from Sheila-Na-Gig. And I probably should plug my latest book, but where in the heck is it? Well, it's Trinity. So it's, I'll put my website up there. The first poem I'm going to read, I think that I I did write from right on Door County, where a couple of people in this reading are going to be pretty soon. And I believe it was in last spring's Sheila. And the second poem I'm going to read was also written at right on Door County last spring. And so I'll start with the first to appear in Sheila. Walking in Door County on Palm Sunday. I'm from LA, so I welcome the way drivers wave with their whole hand in greeting when they pass me walking the highway leading, I'm told, to Green Bay. I imagine they smile and say, "Good day," on their way to the church I am walking away from. White church with a steeple I, bad navigator, use for my still point to find the path back to my temporary home. I fear the sun won't hold. At the bend in the road, I turn toward the steeple, then turn again and head back to the bay. Though uphill and hard, the way home is always faster, and I can walk it in the rain. Or last year, it was more likely snow because it snowed in Door County, one heck of a lot. But it was wonderful because I'm not used to waking up to snow outside my window. That does not happen at the beach in Long Beach, California. If it does, it is the end of the world, folks. So this one also written in the same place. Field notes. There must be a thing with field notes because in my forthcoming book, I have lots of poems that begin with field notes and then where I was when I wrote those notes, although it could be different by the time it's published. Field notes, the woods in April. Night animal cries are different here, and grievance dreams invade my sleep. Cardinal sings, I pity you, I pity you. My dear red bird, I'm not that sad. I watch 4 deer watching me, a pane of glass between us. Good Friday, Passover, in the midst of Ramadan. First robins, a mist of snow. I walk the path the deer walk, pine needles, umber on the woodland floor. So thank you.
Well, thank you for accepting a couple of poems for this edition of Sheila-Na-Gig. This is my first time in. I'm kind of a late bloomer with poetry, and I've got a manuscript that'll be published next year by Finishing Line. So I'm going to start with one of the poems that's in Sheila-Na-Gig this time, and then read the title poem from my chapbook. And I have to say, this is just amazing poetry. I really didn't know what to expect. I haven't been to a Sheila reading before, but I am thoroughly enjoying myself. So this one is called A Birth. And I'm taking you to the West Coast. Well, Donna already took us to the West Coast a bit. So A Birth. Half moon above. Sorry, I hope I can do this. Half moon above, we cross the desert in the night. I notice only tail lights of the truck in front of us, its trailer looming tall and dark as we pass, how it blots out for just a moment the Mojave, over and over. We race the clock. Our daughter is in labor. We got the call at 6 p.m. No time to pack. Toothbrush, underwear, dogs, kibble. Her father already there, dozing in his car. long apart, yet my heart never seems to finish that thing, a garnet, cut, recirculating. We stop only once at the Flying J, where rows of trucks idle under bright lights and long haul drivers catnap in their cabs. For us, coffee, M&Ms, a full tank of gas. For the dogs, a quick walk and meticulous sniffing of interstate mystery scents. Slow, then a speeding up, an epidural, more slowing, progress texts from our son-in-law, and we respond with ours. Blythe, Chiriaco Summit, its General Patton Museum World War II era tanks, all but invisible in the dark. Palm Springs, on a Friday at 3 a.m., LA's as quiet as it gets. Son-in-law's overnight beard, daughter's smile between contractions. Waiting room, final chairs, more coffee, sunrise. At last, a nurse summons me. My daughter is a mother. Her forehead cools under a damp cloth as her arms assess the length and breadth, the weight of mystery, her nose the scent. I should mention that I live in Phoenix. And this is Valentine's Dinner at Wren and Wolf. It'll be, it's the title poem in my upcoming chapbook. We skirt the intimate, wonder aloud how the shrimp gets to Phoenix from Rocky Point. Habit now to talk of supply chains, however short. Your confabulation, a priest who crossed the drug boss in Sonora, forced to broker seafood on the border as penance for misbaptizing babies of the corrupt devout. Write a book, I tell you. I, who once half enjoyed your riffs, hereby reject our disconnect. We're too old to waste time and love. Look at that gray wolf eyeing us from his promontory above the hungry stomach of this hip restaurant, his coat thick, not the least moth-eaten, no decommissioned diorama dog, this toothy guy. He's lifelike as you and I, as our own aging canine whose rear legs splay today as she tries to rise. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Sutherland, and I am in Baltimore. I have my first book is coming to River River Books in June this year. I'm very excited about it. It's called Bullet Points. This poem is not in that collection, but it is in Sheila-Na-Gig, this issue, and I'm just going to read the one that's in this issue. And I like to tell people that my mom was a nun, and she was, and they always sort of do a little double take. I mean, obviously she left the convent before she got married and before we were born, but my mom was a school sister of Notre Dame for some time. And even after she left the convent, she sort of struggled for a long time with that decision. And she sort of looms large in my life and my poetry. And this poem is called Ars Botanica. There was an old black locust tree where I grew up, with a thick and gnarled trunk you couldn't wrap your arms around. It oozed a canal of slime and sap that smelled like beer, stale and sour-fruited, like my mother's breath by late at night. She crushed the cans and left them scattered on the table, one of them allowed to stand so she could tip her ashes in. Spine squared up by the window, never looking out, sucking in and then expelling plumes of blue-gray smoke and fine particulate. A string of rosary beads fluoresced upon her wrist like buckthorn berries, and she liked to finger them while she remembered. Something insidious sank in when the wood was young and spoiled the gut, too deep to weep it out. But nothing happened to me, the child, nothing at all Gothic, because I would not probe the wound, no matter how it reeked. How much more blessed is a child's faith, formed beneath concentric rings the senses construct daily, resolutely turning toward illumination instead of what despoils. I think of my mother now, her concave mouth, her dust, the late day sun caught in her spiral knots of hair, very rarely. I think of her almost never. Thank you.
That was lovely, Jennifer. I'm Haylee Schwenk. I'm reading in Lakewood, Ohio, which is less than a mile west of Cleveland and less than a mile south of Lake Erie. This first poem was in the most recent edition of Sheila-Na-Gig. And just one note about it. There's a reference to Martin Luther apple trees, and that's a reference to a probably apocryphal story that when asked what he would do if he learned the world was ending tomorrow, Martin Luther said that he would plant an apple tree today. Ashes. Hand on the soft spot below my ribs, the echo of my heartbeat. Your mother's ashes on the windowsill. She left us just before white exploded on our trees. Some moments the loss leaves your mind, then rushes back. No shared delight in apple blossoms. Take a handful now of ashes, spread them around the roots, fold up her certainty of ending into our Martin Luther apple trees. Collect seeds from the parsley, till the earth, plant new. I place my hand between dry dirt and water from the hose. When it's time to put in onions, we'll find space here or there. No strict rows, instead, setting up spring surprises of green shoots. Your mother's ashes on the windowsill. Fingers on the underside of your wrist, the echo of your heartbeat. Thanks. And then the second one is just a short little fun poem I wrote. It was the last vacation my husband and I took before the pandemic. It's called Miami Brewing Company. It was country night at the Miami Brewing Company, and the first thing I noticed when we sat down with our beers was the skinny girl in the midriff shirt, flirting with the blonde in the short shorts. But then the DJ called all beginners to the dance floor for a lesson, and you held my purse while Florida Georgia Line played, and I toe-heeled jumped my way into line dancing. And when you handed back my bag, someone was singing, "I'll be your sweet iced tea," and I knew you were my chocolate caramel porter, and I was your cheesy fries. Thanks.
Thank you, Haylee, and thank you everyone for coming and sharing just some beautiful poems tonight. Just love it. Thank you, Bonnie Proudfoot, for helping me celebrate the publication of Household Gods, and for all our open mic readers who continue to create this amazing Sheila-Na-Gig community that we have going. It's always wonderful. And thanks always to Barbara Sable, who is my associate editor in the trenches with me, making this all possible, curating the poems. So thank you all for coming. And if you're watching afar, you can find more at www.sheila-na-gigblog.com. Come check us out. Thank you.